All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Amy Sheldon. I'm one of the Early Childhood Assessment Team School Social Workers with FCPS. And I have here.
And hi, everyone. My name is Ann Brosnan, and I am also with the Early Childhood Assessment Team, and I am a school psychologist.
And today we're going to talk about screen time and sleep, two different topics with a focus particularly on the early childhood preschool ages. And so these are two topics that have come up a lot in our work. I'll be going over the screen time part, and I know a lot of our families, there's just questions about how much is too much, or, you know, some justifications and that kind of thing. And really, my purpose in this section is just kind of understanding some of the why behind things, looking at the research and knowing that it's going to be different for each family. And so kind of just providing more information for that.
Okay. And I will be looking at sleep, again, with the emphasis more on the early childhood, and just providing some ideas and techniques that families can use to help their children manage and maintain good sleep schedules.
All right, so we will go ahead and get into the presentation. Sorry, I was flipping around a little bit. So just a quick overview of our presentation. We're going to get acquainted with updated information on screen time and media usage, recommendations, and the importance of parental interaction for media usage with young children, explore how relationships impact a child's learning and health experiences, examine the role sleep plays in health and learning, and explore how to promote good sleep habits. So first, we're going to talk about screen time. And again, with that context of early childhood piece. So we're looking really birth through preschool. So times they are changing. We've gone through a lot of technological changes recently. And if you think about it, the iPhone was really just put out in 2007, maybe more widely circulated a few years after that, and the iPad in 2010. So really, we're looking at just the past 10 or so years where media has become much more accessible. So there's new information and new research all the time, and we're trying to kind of get a sense of things, and we're building off that information and research we've had for just TV exposure and everything. So I think even what we say here might change again, but it's just we're trying to kind of catch up with the information too. So I think when we talk about screen time, it's typically a lot of a negative connotation. You know, this is bad, too much is, you know, too much. And I do agree that, you know, we will talk about moderation and some of the why later, but I think there's definitely a lot of benefits to screen time. So first, if you're looking particularly for preschool ages too, there's a lot of good programming and apps that talk about mindfulness, deep breathing, social emotional learning. And so there's a lot of good information that is being created and built out there. Also, particularly in the pandemic, it's really been able or allowing us to connect with one another when we really need to connect with each other the most, since we're not able to do so physically. And so, you know, that video chatting with friends and family has been pivotal. With the military families I've worked with, they've used it a lot with a family member deployed or separation. And also economically, it's helped a lot of families be able to keep their positions now through the pandemic, because if they've been able to work virtually, we've been able to implement that. So there's definitely a lot of benefits there. And then also media tools can be a distraction from distressing activities. I know when I take my kids to the dentist's office, they have a TV screen up on the ceiling, which is nice distraction from some of the fear they might be feeling in the dentist chair. So there's definitely tons of good benefits with media and technology and even the accessibility of it. And in the on the bottom, I'm just saying caregiver interaction is key. So I'm going to talk about this throughout the next few slides, but something particularly to consider for early childhood is that the big mitigating factor in screen time is that caregiver involvement, and being able to kind of contextualize the information that children are receiving, particularly because they're children are wired to learn socially and through experiences. And so again, just something to keep in mind that we'll talk about a lot, just that caregiver piece. So brain development and screen time. So there is some research presently going around about just how screen time and the amount of screen time might impact brain development. And so one study had noted that children who were between the ages of 3 to 5 years old who use screens more than 1 hour a day without parental involvement. And again, that mitigating factor of caregiver involvement. So 3 to 5-year-olds who use screens more than 1 hour a day had lower levels of the brain's white matter. And so here it's just saying white matter is key to the development of language, literacy, and cognitive skills. But they do want to emphasize, and I want to emphasize, it does not mean we're causing brain damage for our children. And the thinking is that it could just be when children are accessing screen time, they're not accessing that social interaction with their family, or they're playing, or how they're learning and their environment. And so sometimes that could be limiting in that regard. And it's not permanent effects, everything we're able to develop and change, but just what they're kind of seeing sometimes too when it comes to that key language development. As you see, the neurons that fire together, wire together, really it's just in that early childhood period, the brain develops so quickly. They say that by the time a child is age 5, 90% of their brain is developed, 75% by the time they're age 3. So again, really that brain development requires that frequent interactions and experience to really cement and kind of stay in that lifelong learning. So we're really just talking about providing children with more exposure and opportunities to play and interact to kind of learn that language and learn those early childhood development skills. So the video transfer deficit. So I first want to just talk about the transfer of learning. So that concept is you want ideally a child to be able to learn a concept in one area and be able to apply it in any environment or situation. So for example, let's say you're really working hard with the child to learn the concept of counting to 5. And so it's more than just the memorization of I can count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's what we call the rote learning kind of style of things. Really, we want to say when they're counting to 5, they're understanding that's 5 blocks or 5 pieces of candy. They know what 5 means, so that when they go to the preschool or a store or the playground, they can say, oh, I know there's 5 kids here, or 5 pieces of marble, and understand what that means contextually too. And so that's what we're referring to as the transfer of learning. So then what we're finding is young children have a hard time being able to learn, take from what they're seeing on screen and transfer it into real life situations. So that's what we call the video transfer deficit. And so there's been some studies out there just finding that, they'll take young children, and again, preschool age, toddler age, and they'll say, there's a demonstration of they're hiding a toy in a room. And so they have children who will see it live in person, watching somebody hide in front the toy in front of them. And they'll have another group of children who are just watching it on the video screen. And so they're watching the exact same demonstration, but what they're seeing is it's more difficult for children to be able to find that toy if they've only seen it on the video than if they saw it in real life. And what I found interesting about the Modi experiment here is they looked at 24 and 30-month-old groups of children, and we're trying to kind of introduce learning how this unusual creature's name. And as you see here, there's either responsive or unresponsive live or video demonstrations. And when they say unresponsive, it's just they're reading from a script, they're smiling at set times, they're not really interacting with the child. And so they did both the live and video versions. And so they found that children in both groups were not able to learn when watching the video, even if it was interactive. But they were able to learn it from the live demonstrations. And even if that wasn't interactive. So I do want to highlight that this changes as children get older. They are able to kind of learn and transfer a little bit more as they're older, and with that caregiver interaction to make it more that 3D context. And I want to say this because I know we've been doing a lot of virtual learning through the pandemic, and I don't want to cause alarm and everything. I know, this is an unprecedented situation, and it's very different times. And we're not saying there's going to be long-term impact for this, but again, it goes back to that caregiver interaction, because even for some of the preschool programs, they're doing that shorter segments, asking a caregiver to be involved to kind of give it that 3D context a little bit more. And as children get older, they are able to kind of transfer a little bit of that learning too. So again, we're looking at that early development when it's really children are wired to kind of learn from their environment and experiences that we're focusing on. So screen time usage and parents. And so for this one, I want to say this is not a judgment. I am very guilty of also using the TV as a babysitter or passing that iPad when in a pinch when I really needed some time. So I think that it's important that we all say it's realistic that that happens, particularly in the pandemic where we're trying to negotiate working and our kids having limited access to resources. So it's more just kind of an awareness of some things that might be demonstrated in families. They say that for whatever amount of time a child has access to screens, a parent typically uses more time during the day. And so there was one observational study where they saw 55 parents in a fast food restaurant. And of those 55, 40 of them were accessing their mobile devices. And of those 40, the longer they were on the mobile device, the more the child started acting out to try to get their parent's attention, supposedly. And so just kind of a consideration as we're trying to model behavior and moderation for screen time devices, kind of just some of those reasons. But again, just, looking at the second quote, and I know I have a typo there, I apologize. It says, it kind of helps me out sometimes just to get 5 minutes of a break, just 5 minutes for me to kind of just sit. And I know sometimes, it does help to kind of just give us a second too. So being realistic there. But even this one I thought was interesting. I noticed with my newborn, when I don't have my phone, it's more bonding. If I'm like this, holds the phone and looks at it, he's more, and then squirming motions. So it's interesting how, again, just that idea that as babies, as infants, they're reaching out for that social connection too. So media exposure and obesity. And for this one, I just kind of wanted to highlight some of the studies and information out there related to this. So for one of them, the greater TV viewing time 2-year-olds spent each week, the greater their BMI. So that was one study from 2014. Also, for each extra hour of watching TV, there was an associated extra 2 pounds of body fat. And this is for both children and up. But I think what was interesting with this was it did not have anything to do with the amount of physical activity. So that didn't change things. And so they are thinking that it could be if you're eating in front of the TV, that you're not paying attention as much to those cues of how full you are. So you tend to kind of eat a few more calories that way. And so they're saying research is showing that children eat an additional 167 calories for every hour they watch on television. So just something to consider and keep in mind. Background TV, does it make a difference? This is actually something that's come up a lot too, where we might hear families say the TV is on in the background all day, just generally, and the child may or may not watch, come in and out, but they're mostly playing. And I do want to differentiate that this is different from background music. So background music, they're saying, is generally okay. Some of the cautions they're saying with background TV is it makes a lot of random noises, like a bing or a crash or a wave or, different sounds that are kind of like sharp that might get a child's attention. Because if you think about it, as grownups, we've heard these sounds for so long. We know what they are. We're able to tune them out and say, it's not a risk or it is a risk, or I know what this is, and kind of name it and be able to separate it from a little bit. As children are experiencing these for the first time and really understanding what they are, it kind of detracts from their play. So they might be involved in an activity and then they'll hear a little ding or some kind of noise. And then they'll say, in their mind, even if they're kind of still generally engaging, they're thinking, what was that noise? Where did I hear it from? I wonder what that is. Where did it come from? You know, as all these thoughts are happening, they're taking away from their play. So then they come back to the play, then they might hear another noise, because as we know, TV is full of it. And so as they're going back and forth, their play and their learning is disrupted, but it also might get to the point where they don't want to explore the toy anymore, and they might have to go ask parent for help. And so kind of takes away from that opportunity to learn and experience. So that's just kind of the reasoning behind background television. So these are the recommendations from the American Academy of Pediatrics. And I say that it's as of 2016 because I actually read an article recently saying that the AAP has changed their recommendations. But I hesitate to put that here because I wasn't able to find it on the AAP. So instead, I just at least wanted to share what some of the researchers are suggesting now, that really there is no magic number that's going to work for every family and every situation, that it really changes, but it really comes down to a couple different things. That, again, that caregiver experience and interaction with the media, and then also the quality of programming. So some of the things they're recommending is a slower pace in the shows that kids are watching, and also less of the fantastical elements. So if you think about and smaller segments. So Daniel Tiger or Arthur, they're shorter segments, they're slower paced. And even though they might be puppets or animals or and not humans, because they're engaging in regular everyday activities like humans might, it's not as fantastical as something like SpongeBob, which might be faster paced and kind of, you know, it's under the water and all these, you know, different elements. And so one thing to kind of consider for that too is an acronym called EAMS, which stands for Engaged, Actively Involved, Meaningful Contact, and content, and social component incorporated. And so this, I know it's really small, but I wanted to highlight, this is available through 0to3.org. If you go into their search engine and type in Screen Sense, there is a lot of information available there for you for free for both caregivers and professionals to kind of help give more information on research and suggestions, and really delineate and spell some of those things out for you too. And something to consider, we were talking about just tablets and phones being so new, and the advent of apps, that Rachel Barr, who's a big researcher in early childhood screen time, was saying that there's over 70,000 apps available with the title of educational, but there is no regulation in place right now that makes the determination of what is educational or not. So it's a very loose definition. So that's something to consider as like we're thinking about what kinds of apps our children are engaging in. And so just general recommendations for parents. You know, we're not saying go cold turkey completely. Really, it's just, again, it goes back to there's no magic number, but to at least incorporate some screen-free times during the day where the whole family, both caregiver and the child, are not accessing media. And so if you want to just think about, you know, are there days we want to set like meal times or after school or what have you, where we're all going to agree to just unplug for a little bit, and just at least starting there. And then also when you're able to bring some of that 3D and contextual element with screen time with your children. So when you're watching a show with your child, and let's say they're making bread on TV, talk to your child and say, do you remember when we went to the bakery and the different kinds of bread they had there? Do you remember how it smelled? Do you remember the taste? And do you see how they're making it? Trying to kind of bring a little bit more of that 3D and social interaction element with them. Keeping TVs out of the bedroom, and we're going to go into sleep actually next, but some of the things they were saying is the blue light emitted from screen time actually suppresses the body's natural melatonin levels, which impacts not just being able to fall asleep, but the quality of sleep. So, you know, the child might be able to fall asleep easily with the TV, but how deep a sleep is impacted too with that exposure. So they're recommending at least an hour between the end of screen time and bedtime as one of the recommendations. But to talk about sleep, I'm going to actually hand it over to Anne, and we'll talk about how sleep ties into it all.
So thank you, Amy. Okay, so the first slide I want to go over is just sort of an overview about sleep. Even though it's something that we all do, that all living creatures do, there's a lot of questions that are still surrounding sleep, a lot that we don't know. What we do know is that all living things sleep. Reptiles sleep, fish sleep, insects sleep, and mammal sleep, obviously. And it is essential to our survival. If we were to go without sleep, we would die within 2 weeks. So it's essential. We know also that sleep's important because of how vulnerable animals are when they're sleeping. Of course, when you're asleep, you're not able to be aware as much of what's going on around you. So it puts you at risk for predators or in the environment. We know that as humans, we sleep about 1/3 of our lives. So to break that down, just looking at your age, if you're 30, you have been asleep about 10 years of your life. If you're 40, you've been asleep 13 years of your life. Once you reach 50 years old, you've been asleep 16 years. And if you're 60 years old and watching this, you have been asleep about 20 years of your life, which would be pretty much equivalent to having been asleep since the turn of the century. So we, on the best of times, we're getting some real good sleep about 1/3 of our lives. That said, in general, Americans are sleeping about 2 hours less a night than they did about 50 years ago. And of course, the reason for that are screens, media, which is keeping people up later and interfering with their quality of sleep. And then the importance of sleep is underestimated. If you've ever gone to a doctor's office and had to fill out that questionnaire, they'll ask you about your family history. They'll ask you about, a lot of your medical conditions, but you may notice that they very rarely will ask you about the quality of your sleep or how much you're sleeping. And also medical students typically spend about only 4 hours looking at sleep and sleep disorders in their training. So it really is not given a lot of importance in general, even though it's so essential to survival. We know that sleep is different than being unconscious or being sedated. And there's a few different ways we know this. One of them is called the myoclonic jerk. So the myoclonic jerk is that sensation that we've all had when you're starting to fall asleep and your body suddenly just kind of jerks awake. There's a belief that is a holdover from when we were living in trees and sleeping in trees for our protection. So it's to prevent you from falling out of a tree. Some other things is to know that the line between sleep and awake is somewhat blurred. It's very rare for adults to fall out of bed, even if you're sleeping in a new bed or if you're sleeping on your friend's couch. So we maintain a sense of spatial awareness. And also, we're aware of sounds in our environment. So when you're falling asleep, if you're hearing sounds in your bed that you're used to, you can sleep. But if something changes, like a door opens or there's suddenly a bang somewhere or something, you will wake up. So definitely sleep is not the same thing as being sedated or unconscious. We know sleep is essential for children's development, and we know it for many reasons, but one of which is that by the age of 2, children have actually been asleep longer than they've been awake, which is shocking for parents to hear, but it's actually true. So sleep is actually the primary activity of the brain during early development. It's that essential. And there's something called the high arousal threshold in young children. If you've ever tried to wake up a little child from deep sleep, you know how hard it is. I mean, they will almost literally be fighting you. And that seems to be a protective function that the body does because sleep's so essential for a young child to keep them asleep. We know that the growth hormone is released during sleep, and we also know that people, when they're undergoing stress, tend to have more dream sleep, more REM sleep. So that is also an interesting thing. Now, dreams seem to be, there was one theory that dreams are sort of a byproduct of the brain being cleaned while we're sleeping. So during sleep, your brain, all the gunk and stuff that's built up during the day is cleaned away from your central nervous system. And as that's happening, it's releasing your synapses in different parts of your brain. And there's a belief that that may be why dreams sort of have that sensation where things are popping up, different feelings, different images, different memories from all different parts of your brain as those different parts of your central nervous system are being cleaned and the synapses are firing. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the sleep cycle. Now, sleep is actually a chemical process, and there's two general chemical processes. There's an internal process, and then there's a process that responds to environmental factors. So the internal process is called homeostatic, and what happens is from the moment you're awake during the day, a chemical called adenosine starts building up in your body. And as that chemical builds up through the day, it creates a sensation of drowsiness, being tired, called sleep pressure. So your body wants to sleep, your body releases other chemicals that induce sleep, and your brain waves start to get longer and more relaxed. The other chemical process is a response to the outside environment, which is called circadian. And circadian rhythms are a reaction to two things, primarily when we're sleeping: light. So as it gets darker, we feel more tired. As it gets lighter, we feel more awake. And also temperature. So we tend to sleep better as it gets cooler. And that is why it's easier to sleep in a cool room. It's very much more difficult to get a good night's sleep when you're hot. So those two things are important to keep in mind when you're looking at quality sleep. How much sleep do children need? In general, the recommendations are that the younger they are, the more they need. So the younger kids are, the more sleep they need. And this is just a chart showing that. What are some health problems associated with poor sleep? So here's a list of problems that occur with poor sleep. Basically, when you don't get enough sleep, it causes an increase in your blood pressure and an increase in your cortisol secretions. And cortisol is known as the stress hormone. So it's released in response to stress, your body's response to stress. It's important for blood sugar regulation. It's important for inflammation reduction, metabolic regulation, and memory formation. So you can see how these problems would definitely be impacted by poor sleep. Of course, there's also cognitive problems associated with poor sleep, harder to pay attention, to focus. Your working memory suffers. Your long-term memory suffers because memories don't seem to get consolidated into long-term memory. And that is especially true for declarative memory. So that's those memories that are more like factual, knowledge memories. So if you think about it, if you have a poor night's sleep, it's not like you're going to forget how to drive your car, right? That kind of memory you're going to retain, but you may not remember as easily where you parked your car, for instance, or how to get somewhere. So it's more that informational memory that's impacted. So there are real life impacts of poor sleep for children. This would be a list of it. Obviously, it would impact, it impacts your language, your expressive and receptive language. It impacts how flexible you're able to think and reason through things. It's harder for kids to remember what they've learned before. Poor sleep makes it more likely that people will engage in risky behaviors. And because of that, you also can see problems with, like, kids become more irritable, they become more frustrated. There's also an increase in car accidents for teenagers and suicidal ideation for teenagers as well with poor sleep. But there is a lot we can do to help kids sleep better, and wanted to talk with you about some of those things. We know that sleep is important not just for the child, but for the family as well. Mothers who report that their children don't sleep will also report higher levels of depression, and families where kids aren't getting good sleep also report higher levels of dysfunction. And you can see how those things would play into each other, where if children are irritable and grumpy and not feeling good about themselves and about things going on in their environment, that they're going to be more difficult. They're going to show more behavioral issues. So. Dr. Jody Mindell is the chair of the Pediatric Sleep Council, and she's done multiple studies to look at how we can help children fall asleep and stay asleep. And her basic recommendation is to maintain good bedtime rituals. So establish and maintain good bedtime rituals. And these should last about 20 minutes to 45 minutes. And she recommends 3 different things. So hygiene would be like brushing your teeth, maybe taking a bath or a shower to get ready for bed. Communication would be singing a lullaby, reading a story together. And then the physical contact might be just a hug and a kiss. Sometimes parents might give a little back rub. What you want to be sure that families are doing, though, is that they're understanding that this is something that needs to go in the same sequence every night. And it's something that needs to be done every night. So it needs to be something parents can live with. They don't want to make it too elaborate. And once you have a good bedtime ritual in place, it reduces the likelihood of what's called curtain calls. So that is when you have kids saying, "Mom, can I have another drink? Dad, one more story." So it just helps put parameters around that sleep time. We can help promote good sleep regulation by doing several things. And one of them is setting and enforcing consistent bedtimes and wake times, even on the weekends. So not staying up later on the weekends or sleeping in. During the day, keeping a regular schedule of activities as much as possible. I know it's hard for a lot of families, but this is something that really will help children develop that regulation. Avoiding bright light in the bedroom at night. We know about circadian rhythms and how important that is. And then in the morning, increasing light exposure to help kids wake up. And another thing is having appropriate nap schedules, so not letting kids sleep long times for the napping, just so that you make sure that they're tired at bedtime. So when we're looking at sleep, again, that consistent bedtime ritual is so important. Amy talked a little bit about limiting television or cell phone use in bed, keeping bed really as a place where you sleep. This was sort of interesting to me too, is not using bed or bedtime as a punishment or reward. So not sending kids to their bed for a timeout, not saying, well, I'll let you stay up later as a reward, or you got to go to bed early as a punishment. So trying to maintain a real positive feelings around sleep. And then also, and this I know is also really tough, but as much as possible, having kids sleep in their beds and not in other areas. So not on the couch, not in the stroller, not in the car seat. I know, again, that's tough to do. But again, you really want to establish that connection, that bed is the place for sleep. So in general, what we're trying to do when we look at promoting sleep is reducing arousal at bedtime and promoting relaxation. Electronics out of the bedroom. You don't want to have a lot of stimulating play or activity before bed. You know, sometimes parents or dads like to roughhouse a little bit with the kids before bedtime. That's not the time to be doing it, because you're going to get them all up and moving again. Not having heavy meals right before bed, nothing real cognitively or emotionally stimulating, reducing caffeine, and remembering that caffeine is not just in coffee or tea, it's in other things as well. Caffeine has a half-life of 5 hours. So when we're looking at, if you had a cup of coffee this morning at 9 o'clock, that caffeine will be in your system pretty much until about 7 o'clock tonight. So caffeine really does hang in there for a long time, and being aware of that. And another thing that I just want to bring up here is you really, sometimes people will say, well, I'll stay up late during the week, or I'll let my kids stay up during the week and then we can sleep in over the weekend. It really doesn't work that way. Sleep is as essential to survival as eating, drinking, breathing. So it's not like you can just wait. You can't like hold your breath all week and then breathe a lot on the weekend. It's the same thing with sleep. You need to have it consistently on a regular basis every day, and especially true for children as they're developing. Something called sleep training is another term that's used for when children are allowed to kind of cry until they fall asleep. And if your families are choosing to try this method, you can assure them that there's been no evidence of any adverse effects long-term for kids in terms of their behavior or their emotional health. Another term that you may hear is something called sleep camping, which is just a fancy way to say that you're sleeping in proximity with your child in the same space or room as your child. And if your child arouses and awakes during the night, you're offering them comfort. If you have families that, their kids aren't sleeping, you can let them know that by about the time children are 9 months old, the vast majority of them are sleeping through most of the night. I know that can be a hard thing to tell a parent early on if they're struggling with a child who's awake, but what you want to let parents know is that every baby's different, every parent's different, they're going to do what's best for their family, and it's going to get better for them. So hang in there. Something that families might talk to about or ask about is sleeping with your child, which also is called bed sharing or the family bed or co-sleeping. Most American doctors would advise against this, especially for infants. And the reason for that is there's a higher rate of sudden infant death syndrome, or SIDS, for children who sleep with, or for babies who sleep with their parents. Also, there is also the greater risk, of course, that a child could be suffocated in bed with a parent because, a parent might roll over, but also because you have pillows and blankets and comforters in a bed with a parent. It's a hard habit to break once you do start sleeping with your child. You children don't have to sleep with parents to be happy and healthy. There's plenty of instances of kids who sleep by themselves and they're absolutely fine. And also, as a parent who has had children sleep with me, I can tell you that you don't get as good a night's sleep. So that too, it does interrupt parents' sleep. But what we do know is that there are families who do sleep with their children for cultural reasons, for philosophical reasons, or a lot of times also just for financial or economic reasons. Being able to have your own bed and your own bedroom is a condition of affluency and a product of affluency. And many of our families don't have that option. We know that worldwide about 67% of kids will sleep in the company of others. Now, that might not be a parent, it might be a sibling, but it's a very common practice, worldwide. In fact, in most countries, it is more common for women to sleep with their children than it is for them to sleep with their husbands. Kids aren't going to be spoiled or overly dependent if they're sleeping with their families. And a lot of families do, or a lot of cultures also do value that as a way to create a bond with kids during the nighttime. So that's those are some ideas, some techniques that will work for kids in looking at how to promote and maintain good sleep. But many of these techniques will also work for adults. So the pandemic has been a great opportunity for those of us who have been fortunate enough to be able to work from home to maybe provide us with an opportunity to have better sleep or sleep longer. And if you're one of those people, I hope you're enjoying that and enjoying the benefits of it. But we do know that about 75 million Americans do not get good sleep on a regular basis. So I just wanted to put this out to those of you, if you fall in that category, to challenge yourself and see if you can try to improve that for yourself, for your mental health, for your physical health. Like I said, these techniques, establishing that good sleep hygiene, it works for kids, but it'll also work for you. and certainly want all of us to be getting good sleep for our own sakes, but for the sakes of our families and for the families we work with. So thank you so much for attending to this and listening to Amy and me, and also wanted to just thank you for the hard work you do every day supporting our families and our students.
Yes, absolutely. And I just have this slide up here in case you have any questions or wanted any additional information. Please feel free to contact us at any time. But yes, thank you. I hope you enjoy the conference.